In January 2024, North Korea announced that it had officially abandoned the goal of unification with the South. While the news might seem relatively insignificant, given that few now believe that reunification is possible, the announcement nevertheless came as a shock to observers and has far-reaching implications. As well as signalling a far more unstable relationship between the North and South, it also appears to indicate a worrying new threat to wider regional and international security. So, what exactly lies behind the policy change, and how worried should we really be? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Kerr-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. The division of the Korean Peninsula remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Cold War. While the Soviet Union has long since disappeared and the People's Republic of China has reinvented itself, the division of Korea represents a living fossil of a bygone era in international relations. But the division is no mere quirk of the international system. It still has profound implications. For a start, there's its effect on the peninsula and its inhabitants. With the two parts still technically at war, the border between the North and South is one of the most heavily fortified boundaries in the world. The constant threat of war pervades every aspect of society, from mass conscription to high defence spending. It also casts a long shadow over international peace and stability, with major powers like the United States, China, Russia and Japan all deeply involved in the peninsula's security. Korea's division complicates broader international relations. To add to all this, North Korea's development of nuclear weapons has added a worrying new dimension to the situation. And yet, despite their profound political, economic and social differences, the two Koreas have always maintained an official policy of peaceful reunification. Until now. The Korean Peninsula lies in East Asia. Divided along the 38th parallel, it consists of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, better known as North Korea, and the Republic of Korea, South Korea. In terms of size, North Korea is slightly larger, covering around 120,000 square kilometres, or approximately 47,000 square miles. This stands in contrast to the South, which is roughly 100,000 square kilometres, or 39,000 square miles. However, in terms of population, South Korea has double the number of inhabitants than the North, with 51 million compared to North Korea's 25 million. While Korea has a long and rich history stretching back at least 2,000 years, it first emerged as a single entity in the 10th century with the unification of several kingdoms. However, while the Koreans forged a distinct identity, the peninsula would spend much of its history caught between its more powerful neighbours. Having been a Chinese vassal state for much of the past millennium, things changed in the late 19th century. As Japan's power grew, China's influence over Korea steadily declined. And all this came to a head in 1910 when Japan annexed Korea. This marked the start of a brutal colonial occupation. However, after 3.5 decades, this came to an end in 1945 when Japan was defeated and forced to withdraw. At first, it appeared that Korea would begin a new era as a united and independent state. But such hopes were short-lived. Just as Europe was divided into US and Soviet spheres of influence, the start of the Cold War also saw a power struggle emerge over control of the peninsula. Ultimately, Washington and Moscow agreed to divide Korea into two zones along the lines of the 38th parallel. In the south, the United States military government in Korea remained in control until May 1948, when the new Republic of Korea was created. Meanwhile, up in the north, Soviet rule continued until November of that year, when the Democratic People's Republic of Korea emerged, led by its premier, Kim Il-sung. From the start, Kim was determined to unite the peninsula under communist rule, and on the 25th of June 1950, North Korean forces launched a full-scale invasion of the South. Seizing on Russia's decision to boycott the UN at the time, the Security Council authorised the creation of an international force under US command to repel the attack. But as North Korea retreated, the People's Republic of China, which was then still allied with the Soviet Union, stepped in. On the 27th of July 1953, the sides agreed to a ceasefire. After 3 years of bitter fighting that left millions dead, the peninsula remained partitioned along the 38th parallel. Without a formal peace agreement ending the war, tensions continued over the next decade and a half as both sides claimed legitimate control over the entire peninsula. At the same time, the North and South remained ideologically at odds. While the North remained firmly under communist control and tried to pivot between Beijing and Moscow as relations between China and the USSR collapsed, the South's authoritarian military government remained firmly allied with the West. However, by the start of the 1970s, things appeared to be changing. On the 4th of July 1972, the two sides issued a historic joint statement outlining the principles of reunification through peaceful means and without foreign interference. But while this was hailed as a significant breakthrough, little progress was made over the next 2 decades. While the peninsula had been divided for almost half a century, the end of the Cold War at the start of the 1990s offered new hope that things might change. The reunification of East and West Germany and the merger of North and South Yemen gave hope that Korea could also be heading towards reunion. Moreover, North and South Korea were finally admitted as UN members, having been kept out over their disputed claims to authority over the entire peninsula and the vetoes of their key Cold War patrons within the Security Council. As a result, the 1990s and early 2000s saw more active engagement between the sides. This included the first ever Inter-Korean Summit in June 2000 between South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, a meeting that saw the sides again commit to work towards peaceful reunification. In 2007, the leaders met for another summit. Reaffirming the 2000 declaration, they also agreed to develop greater cooperation. At the same time, they jointly sponsored a UN General Assembly resolution calling on the wider international community to support and assist dialogue, reconciliation and reunification. And even as recently as 2018, the sides again called for peaceful reunification. As well as another summit between the leaders that April, the goal of reunification was underscored in a communique released after the historic meeting between US President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un a few months later. But while the two sides continually voiced their commitment to reunification and even maintained government departments dedicated to the policy, the chances of unity became ever more distant as they went increasingly different directions. While the industrialised North had originally been more prosperous than the rural South, this had changed by the 1960s, and by the late 1980s, the South was racing ahead, while the North remained locked in a repressive, inward-looking and increasingly impoverished autocracy under the Kim dynasty. The South had turned to democracy and embraced an international outlook. This change and the stark differences between the sides was highlighted by the decision to award the 1988 Olympic Games to the South, a decision that saw North Korea blow up a Korean Airlines jet in retaliation for the perceived slight to its honour. Although it should be noted that the North sent a team when the South hosted the Winter Olympics 30 years later in 2018. These profound differences also highlighted the immense practical problems of any reunification, leaving aside the obvious question of the political system that would be adopted and the position of the North's ruling Kim family. Integrating millions of indoctrinated Northerners would have massive social consequences. Indeed, even the language had diverged since the 1940s. To top it all, reunification would have massive economic costs. Integrating two fundamentally different economies would be a monumental task, especially as the northern workforce would be wholly untrained to work within an advanced high-tech economy. But while the prospect of a peaceful negotiated reunification has long been a wholly unrealistic idea, it's the deteriorating security situation and North Korea's increasingly belligerent posture that's given particular cause for concern. Despite the occasional statements of goodwill and unity, the situation on the peninsula has been steadily worsening over the past 2 decades as North Korea seems to be building up its military capabilities, not only against the South, but against other key actors, including Japan and the United States. The most worrying development has of course been the North's acquisition of nuclear weapons. This came to international attention in 2006 when it carried out its first atomic test. Despite the global outcry, it's now estimated that it may have as many as 30 warheads, with material to make as many as 50 more. Meanwhile, the North has been rapidly expanding its ballistic missile program. Over the past 2 years, it's carried out a record number of tests, regularly launching missiles over Japan. More worryingly, in December 2023, the Japanese government announced that it believed that North Korea had built a missile capable of striking any point across the mainland of the United States. These fears about the North's direction have been further encouraged by its steadily expanding cooperation with Russia. This came to international attention when it emerged that Moscow had turned to Pyongyang to provide weapons for its war in Ukraine. This was followed by an important summit meeting between Kim and President Vladimir Putin in September 2023. All this has raised concerns about the direction that North Korea is taking, with fears that it's maybe moving steadily towards a conflict with the South. It's against this backdrop that the news broke in January 2024 that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had called for a rewriting of the country's constitution, erasing the articles that call for peaceful unification. On top of this, and even more worryingly, he announced that the North now regarded South Korea as its primary enemy. While there's no doubt that the announcement came as a huge shock for observers who were astounded that the North Korean leader had so openly and suddenly abandoned what many called an existential policy, the question that's now been asked is, what does all this mean in real terms? On the one hand, the announcement might seem relatively insignificant. After 80 years of division, few expected a negotiated peaceful reunification. There seemed no chance that the Kim dynasty would voluntarily relinquish its power, and there's no way that the South would agree to any union dominated by the North. And yet, at the same time, the statement has been viewed as profoundly important. By an optimistic reading, it suggests that the North is finally killing off the idea of reunification for its population. It will just continue as it is. More worryingly, and against the backdrop of growing tensions, there are fears that it may in fact signal that the North is gearing up for a new war with the South. Either way, any hopes for Korea's peaceful negotiated reunification have now seemingly disappeared, if they ever really existed. Instead, it seems that any reunification will either come from war or following the collapse of the North, with all the consequences that either scenario will carry. Under these circumstances, the realisation of the dream of reunification, should it ever happen, will be nothing less than devastating. I hope you found that helpful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.